And then if there's funding involved, outside funding, say from the SBA or private funding even, like we went to a private equity group, there's a lot to have happen. And owners, sellers are not generally prepared for that. As I mentioned before, they may be fantastic at what they do, fantastic printer, an incredible HVAC guy, a great lawyer, a great doctor, but they've never done this before. And there are a lot of requirements to get from A, the beginning of the process, to Z, to the
Right.
time we close. So I would say that patience is a virtue. I didn't create that line, of course, but patience is a virtue and one which you have to just trust the process.
Hello and welcome to the Smart Business Owner Podcast with your host Schubert. Hello and welcome to the Smart Business Owner Podcast. My name is Schubert, your host. As always, we are here to bring you the best insights and strategies to help you grow, protect, and thrive in your business. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce someone who brings a wealth of expertise and experience to the show. Our guest is Phil Proctor, a seasoned business advisor affiliated with Transworld Business Advisors. Phil is not only a trusted advisor in the field, but also a certified public accountant, a CPA. He holds an MBA, giving him a unique perspective that combines business strategies with financial insight. He's based in South Florida. Phil has worked with countless business owners, helping them navigate the complexity of buying, selling, and growing their business. Whether you're looking to expand your business, considering a sale, or just want to gain a sharper edge in your financial strategies, Phil has invaluable insight to share. Phil, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Of,
Appreciate that.
of course, of course.
This will be fun.
All right, all right. So, Phil, obviously I've known you for a while now, but for some of our listeners that don't know anything about you, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about your background? How did you get started and all the good stuff?
Well, I started as a young white boy in Brooklyn. That's a quote from a movie, by the way.
That's fine.
Yeah. No, we grew up in New York. And by the way, I just got back. We went back. A bunch of us went to the World Series in New York
Wow.
last week.
How was that?
Yeah, it was fantastic. It turns out we attended the only game that the Yankees won, and
Wow. I'm assuming you're
really,
a Yankee fan.
I am a Yankee fan, but it wasn't all that important, Schubert, to me that they won. It was just checking something off my bucket list. Going to the World Series. It was a big deal, and New York, which always has a certain pulse to it, as you're aware,
Right.
was absolutely electric
Wow.
from the series. Everyone from janitors to waiters to the people at the front desk, the clerks, everyone was talking about the series, and it was just an amazing experience. To any baseball fan, I would say you've got to go at least once. It was fantastic.
Was that your first time that you attended?
First time at a World Series, yes, yes, and to have it against between the Yankees and the Dodgers, I guess Yankees and Mets would have been just as good. But there's a long time rivalry between first the Brooklyn Dodgers and the Yanks, and now of course
Right.
LA. And it was a great experience. Of course, we did all the other attendant things over a 5 day period that any tourist would do. The city's alive and vibrant. It was fun, a lot of fun.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah, yeah. We just for purposes of comparison. So we spend most mornings in a place called Bryant Park. You might not know it. Basically, Midtown,
Okay.
near Times Square. It's just an oasis amongst the concrete jungle. And so we'd have our breakfast out there with thousands of people walking by as we were having our breakfast in a beautiful park-like setting. Like I say, almost like an oasis.
Right.
And then when we came home, so my wife and I have our breakfast out on the back porch on our lake, and both are equally magnificent, but there was just a stunning difference between the two.
Wow.
One with all the vibrancy of New York City,
Right.
and one with the peace and quiet of my ducks in my backyard and my lake.
Right.
It was an interesting dichotomy. That's all.
That's good.
Yeah, it was fun.
So it was good to go back to your roots, a New York City boy.
Yeah, we go back from time to time. It's every couple of years we go back, and this was just special because of the series. And, background wise, I went to college on Long Island, CW Post alumnus, and degree in accounting, got my CPA in New York and then in Florida. Worked for a Big Eight, at the time, Big Eight accounting firm. Now, of course, it's Big Four. You guys know it as EY. Back in the day, it was Ernst and Ernst,
Right.
not EY. And got a great business background there. And there's no place like that to get a really great in-depth feeling and knowledge and understanding about the ins and outs of business, how it works, different accounting systems, different businesses, different industries. We were totally at Ernst. We were totally industry agnostic. So I got a great indoctrination as a young man into retail and wholesale and industrial and manufacturing, all kinds of industries, and just a fantastic experience at Ernst, sort of cutting my teeth. And from there, I've bought and sold five of my own businesses over time.
Wow.
I've worked for a couple of Fortune 100 companies. The one that's most memorable is GlaxoSmithKline out of the UK, but with a very strong presence in the United States. Of course, you might know it as GSK.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
great experience there too. I would say everything I've done basically has kind of led me up to this point in a very positive way. There's a path that you don't necessarily carve out for yourself, or you think you're going in one direction,
Right.
and then the forces that be sort of set you back on, I guess, maybe where you're supposed to be. I
Right.
guess. But so it's been a great path leading me to here.
So you hear that quite often. A lot of time entrepreneur would tell you that when you have a calling, your profession chooses you as opposed to you choosing it.
Right.
So it sounds
Exactly.
like that was the case for you. Shaping your trajectory. Now, did you always knew that you wanted to end up becoming an entrepreneur? Was that always in the back of your mind when you were working with all these different companies?
No, no, not really. I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. My father was an entrepreneur. My uncles, my grandfather and great grandfather. So it was in my blood to do that. I would have gone into business with my dad. It was the printing business. He had his own printing business.
In New York?
I worked with him through junior high school and high school. Learning the basics of the business, just doing odd stuff,
Right.
collating, sweeping the floor, whatever it was that I had to do as a young man, and eventually learned the idiosyncrasies about the presses, how to run presses, use the cutters, use the folders, every part of the manufacturing process in printing, and every bit of it was wonderful. In the end, we had a bit of a falling out.
Between
I
you and
he
that?
wanted me, yeah, he wanted to make, and it's very common amongst children of entrepreneurial parents. We got along great. I loved my dad, but and this was all on me, by the way. This is an interesting story. One day I said to him, "Hey, Dad," I think I was like 18. I wasn't planning to go to college, and I maybe 17. And he said, "I said, when am I going to be a partner? In the printing company?"
Right.
And he thought he was being magnanimous, and in hindsight, of course, he was. He said, "I'll tell you what, son. For your 20th birthday, you'll be a full partner." Now, from his perspective, he was being very kind, but for a 17-year-old, 3 more years sounded like an eternity.
Wow.
So I basically said, "To hell with this." I was offended, actually. Shows you what immaturity can do to you.
Right.
I was offended and said, "Well, to heck with this. I'm going to go to college." So I was always good at numbers. They came easy to me. Thus the accounting background, the accounting degree. And so, like, those are the kinds of little you know, disruptions in the force that you get along your path in life that
Right.
cause you to do different things that may or may not work out. In my case, every part of it was strong.
Now, was business advising always on your radar, or in the back of your mind, you knew that you were going to end up, having a business advising business?
That was very fortuitous as well. Essentially, a few years ago, I'd had a health event and I wasn't able to do a lot of the things that were keeping me busy in my spare time, which I thought perhaps once I retired in a few years, I'd be able to do these things at a very high level. So it was tennis, it was swimming, it was cycling, it was a bunch of things that I like to do at a high level, like in clubs. And once I had this health event, I was still able to do them, but not nearly close to the level that I had done them prior to this health event. So I was very upset, disappointed, and I decided to retire. And I was just sitting in the pool with my friends all day. I live in a nice retirement community, just sitting around with my friends all day. And Schubert is like, it's hard to explain, I think. You'll understand it, and I hope to the folks who are listening, they'll understand it. I just felt a terrible sense of what you might refer to as irrelevancy. I didn't feel important to anyone anymore, like I made a difference. I mean, life was fine. We live in a paradise. We're all, you and I are living in South Florida. It's
Right.
fantastic to live, as you're aware. But there's some part of me that wants to make a difference. And as a retired person, I couldn't do that. I felt very unneeded. I mean, I have a great family, great friends, but it's different commiserating and having fun with people versus being needed by them. So I was sitting around one day at the pool with my wife. Not the first time, by the way. We went through a life question with my wife to come to my aid, and she put together all of my strengths. Both of them.
She did.
Yeah, both strengths. And she basically she was the one who suggested it, and I went to research it. This is a couple of 3 years ago, and once again she was right. And so I wound up interviewing with a couple of the major firms. Transworld, which is where I am today. Transworld is happens to be the largest business brokerage in the world, certainly in the U.S., with a tremendous amount of resources and a tremendous marketing thrust and reach.
Right.
I felt that, though I knew a lot about business and I've been doing it all my life, I didn't really know much about business brokering, though I had sold a couple of my businesses and purchased a couple of them through business brokers. I didn't really know the ins and the outs. So I wanted a company that could teach me, educate me, and then be sort of like a backbone for me when I had questions so that I wouldn't fall down. I'd be able to help my clients as if I'd been doing it for 30 years.
Right.
And very fortunately, I made the right choice in that. Um, I could go on and on about how great Transworld is, but I've found the right place. The backup, the support for my clients is nothing short of fantastic.
Now,
So very good.
when your wife mentioned that to you or suggested that to you, hey, why don't you become a business advisor? You've owned so many businesses over the years. I think you'd be great at that. Was there any pushback on your side to her to say, no, I don't want to do it? Or was it an inspiration for you to say, hey, that's the red ball went off, and you'd be like, hey, that's exactly what I need to do? What was the process like?
Yeah, more the latter. And I've learned, by the way, I've been married for almost 50 years. It'll be 50 years next year. I've learned over the time that E.F. Hutton, you'll remember them. They've been merged many times. There used to be a large financial company called E.F. Hutton,
Right.
and their marketing line was, when E.F. Hutton talks, people listen.
Mm,
Well, when your wife talks, it's important that you listen. Somehow they've got insight, and I've learned over the years that I need to listen to that. So my ears perked up, and I went to a point where I said, okay, I'll research this, and I did. And it just took a lot of, honestly, without joking, about my strengths. It just took a lot of what I already had, including a very strong affiliation with many of the CPAs in the South Florida area. I know a bunch of them, and just a tremendous amount about business. And I really like being a resource. As I said, I wanted to feel needed. And so when she suggested it, it didn't take me a week to do all this research, another week to reach out to the three largest companies, Transworld included. And I showed up at their door like a little lost puppy, and I'm just kidding. I showed up at the door, interviewed, and the rest is history, as they say.
wow.
All three are good companies. Just Transworld had the most for me. It's got to feel right.
And I'm assuming Transworld did feel right to be, a good partner.
Very much so. A lot of people there willing to help who had a lot of experience. Excuse me, sorry about that. Yeah, a lot of people who've been doing it a long time, and like I'll give you for instance, when I'm in the office, two tables away, I've got somebody who doesn't work for Transworld, but is an approved, a preferred SBA lender. And so if I have questions about a specific deal, the best way to fund it, I just go, "Hey, Don, how do I handle this?" And he says, "Hey, Phil, you do this." Because you can't know everything. So it's nice
Right,
to have experts. I've got an insurance guy that sits just on the other side of my desk. All he does is help us write insurance, and insurance is a big deal today for business sellers and buyers. It's a big deal.
right,
And so I've got another guy sitting right there that I can approach. I've got a visa, an immigration attorney who helps people from out of the country get visas. So it's like, "Hey, Rocky, what's the story on this? How do I best go about helping this guy with a visa? Can you help me? Would you be interested in helping out?"
so
All of these things are
basically, if you
available to
have an
me.
entrepreneur overseas that wants to move into the US, you guys can help them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we're not attorneys, but
Right,
I can provide them. One of the great things about it is I've been able to develop a very wide net of business professionals working through Transworld who can help me with everything that I've needed so far. And I have confidence in the future. The other day, I wound up with a business sale for a union company, a company that is in a union. I won't get
right,
any more specific, of course. But my people inside, I had some questions about how I would approach the business sale. I'd never worked with a union shop before. And sure enough, there were a few people in at the sales meeting. This is just this past Thursday, just yesterday, who said, "Yeah, Phil, I'll help you with that. I've got no problem with it. They don't ask for any money. They don't ask for anything. They just want to help, just like I want to help."
right.
So they were able to help me with some idiosyncrasies and specifics about how to help a union company go to market, how to list, how to get the buyer involved in the union. Just a lot of things that I don't have to really work too hard at because they're right there for me. It's the reason I chose them, and it's been my decision has been rewarded many times over.
That's awesome. It's always good when you're looking back from the decision you made not too long ago and you feel good about it. So that's we assure you that here you made the right choice. Now,
Yeah, look, I'm like everybody else. I don't make the right choices all the time. You make some good ones, you make some bad ones. Hopefully, on average, you get in the general direction you want to go in, even if it's not the same field you thought you might be in.
right.
But life takes you strange places. But if you wind up close to where you wanted to be, where your vision was, and that's a blessing. And so I've made some more right ones than wrong ones. That's all.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Now, every entrepreneur, they have a driving force that gets them out of bed on a daily basis. What would you say
Yeah.
is that force for you?
It's unquestioned, unequivocal. It's just the desire to help people at this point. And I know that sounds overplayed, Schubert. I get that. But honestly, at this point in time, and don't get me wrong when I say this, I like money as much as the next guy. Believe me, I like earning commissions. But I don't need the money. I don't have to work to survive, to live a nice life. I mean, I've been there. Most people in the audience will understand what that looks like, working hard, raising a family, all that stuff. So that's most of that's in the past for me, right? I'm doing this because I love it.
Right,
And these people, there are buyers and sellers out there that are depending upon somebody who really cares. So I feel very strongly that the very reason I got into this, to feel relevant, I feel more relevant than ever before in any position I've ever had, even the ones including where I had my own brick and mortar companies, like large printing companies. I feel very vindicated by all this just because I can help. So, for instance, in a couple of sales positions that I've had,
right,
very high level positions, your basic concept. Well, you have a boss sitting over you who wants you to make sales, and
right,
you've got to hit quotas. I'm sure you understand that. You've got to hit quotas. Your driving force in life becomes to make a sale, and the general sales process, as everyone knows, can be very difficult, no matter how good you are.
right.
And you can spend an hour detailing a product and your service and trying to speak to customers' needs. You can spend all day doing that. And in the end, inevitably, the question is, okay, what's your price? And if your price is a little bit too high, and I'm exaggerating, but I could have lost when I had my printing company, I could have lost a $200,000 order for $1,000. As ridiculous as that sounds,
Yeah, that
with
sounds.
large companies,
Yeah.
everybody would know the names of these companies that I dealt with, and it always stung. In this position, it's not like that in any way. Everyone that I deal with, the buyers and the sellers both, are very interested and need to know the best way to do this. They need a helping hand. They want to understand. They know they need help. They may be fantastic at their business, making whatever they're earning, 100,000, $1 million a year. It doesn't matter. They may be great at their business, but they've never sold a business and they don't know how to get there.
Right.
And it's a long and winding road, believe me. So having somebody to help you, just like you'd have an accountant help you or you'd have an attorney help you, some professional, you need to know how to get around the roadblocks and the bumps in the road. And that's what Transworld is there for. I place the emphasis on Transworld. I'm just very self-effacing, but between myself and Transworld, we get a great job done. I feel like we do a great service, and my customers are very appreciative. This is not a race to the bottom on price. This is, hey Phil, let's discuss. Let's How do I do this? And I say, okay, tell me your goals. What do you really want to accomplish, and when do you want to accomplish it by? Right? Are you looking to retire, and what would you do in retirement? Do you and even I've gotten my network so locked in. Do you need somebody to discuss estate planning with you if it's a retirement? Most people are into retiring when they're selling a business, but some
Right.
not so. Some want to move on to another business. Some want to set up a legacy for their family and a place for their kids to get wealth from.
Right.
Others may have a divorce, or they may have illness in the family, or themselves they might be ill. There are many reasons why people would want to sell, and I just feel like when I get involved, it's from my heart, and they somehow know that. And so, where I would normally have issues with a client telling me everything that's important to them so I could help them better, and anybody who's in
Right.
sales knows how that is, right? I know Schubert, you know how that is because you and I have been through that.
Right.
It's important to know, but they don't want to share when it's buying a commodity, when it's something that they've never done before and would likely be the largest transaction of their lives. They know they need help.
Right.
And so I'm very happy to be there to help.
So
It makes me
basically,
feel
that's your motivation to get you out of bed every day and get out there, get back on the road, and get after it.
with vim and verve. The first thing I do in the morning after the personal stuff, of course, is I hit the tennis courts at 6:45 well, 6 days a week. I'm back at my desk by 8:30,
Nice.
showered, back at my desk, and I can't wait to dive into it to see what we can do to help to move deals along.
That's
It
good.
and it's exciting.
I mean, I can tell. The way you're talking about it, you are very, very,
I'm
excited and
passionate.
proud.
I'm passionate about it. I tell everybody I can talk to. Usually it's not in a situation like this,
Right.
but I'm just passionate about it. It's a stunning change for me, and to have experienced it at this stage of life, where I've now got all this experience to throw at an issue, a question, a problem, a concern. I've likely experienced everything the seller or the buyer is wanting to know, just from 40 years of being in business, being in sales. So there's a lot that I can provide. And I've got most of my marbles left too. I find I have to write a lot of things down, or I might not remember them, but that's what Google Notes is for.
That's good. That's good. Now, you touched a little bit about it. Let's segue into the selling part of it. Selling a business, which is what you do, which is your business. This is a point that is super important for business owner. Why is it critical for a business owner, to sell the business? Some of the critical aspect of it. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So just to confirm, that we're on the same page. You mean what is critical for the owner, for the seller to know about the sales process? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Um, well, there's so many things. Honestly, to narrow it down to one, I would say, and I'm very transparent upfront with all my sellers and buyers, by the way. It's not it's not as easy as you might think. Even if I found a buyer within 30 days for that business, and we have vast resources to be able to sell the business to make sure it's marketed properly. I don't use that term lightly, but just tremendous resources to get it noticed, right? But I will tell you, just to show you how difficult it can be, the on average, this is the mean average. On average, it takes 8 to 10 months to complete a sale. Once it goes live on the listing sites, it can take 8 to 10 months to complete it. Now, have I seen them sell in a month? Yes, but it would be a rare exception. So sellers are not aware of that. And then if there's funding involved, outside funding, say from the SBA or private funding, even like we went to a private equity group, there's a lot to have happen. And owners, sellers are not generally prepared for that. As I mentioned before, they may be fantastic at what they do, fantastic printer, an incredible HVAC guy, a great lawyer, a great doctor, but they've never done this before. And there are a lot of requirements to get from A, the beginning of the process, to Z, to the
Right.
time we close. So I would say that patience is a virtue. I didn't create that line, of course, but patience is a virtue and one which you have to just trust the process. So I want them to know that you're in for a ride, a little bit of a roller coaster, circuitous route, right? But we'll get you there. Trust the process, have patience, and the benefits at the end will be absolutely worthwhile. There isn't any one of my sellers who wouldn't absolutely agree with that. It's just, you need to get, you've put a lot of work into this business, 20, 30, 40 years
Right.
of your sweat and labor. And I know what that's like because I've done it to get the business to where it is. And now you need a return and you want it to happen smoothly and easily. And by the way, while this is all happening in the background, I would be a Transworld agent would be handling a lot of the details so that the owner, the seller, does not have to.
Right.
Their main job, I tell them all the time, is to run that business and keep the fires burning.
Right.
They've got to keep it going so that when the when the reins finally change hand to the buyer, that they're getting the business they thought they were going to get when they first looked at it, when they made the offer.
Right.
Revenue has to stay up, expenses have to stay down, growth has to continue to be there. And that's your job, Mr. Seller. My job is to make everything happen behind the scenes with the buyer, with the attorneys, with the banks, everybody who gets involved. And there's a lot.
Yeah. Well said. And sometimes you even hear sometimes when somebody's getting ready to sell a business, they might be a year away from being ready to sell it. From my understanding, sometimes you would talk to a CPA or a business advisor, and they would say, "Well, there's a lot of things I need to be aligned before I even list that business." Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a big one, Schubert. That's a great point. You've never been a business broker, have you?
No.
Okay. I mean, I know you relatively well, but you just seem to ask some really relevant questions. It's almost like you know where the bones are buried. It's kind of
Well,
interesting.
these questions are questions that people are searching for, and they want to know about these things. And there's a lot of our listeners that are business owners. Uh, they want to. I mean, some of them think they're ready. Some of them think, "Hey, man, I'm just like I have my business here, and maybe next year I'll just sell it." And then when they call you, and you say, "Well, it looks like you're a year away. You're not even close." So that's why I asked that questions. Hopefully,
I got to turn this off. Sorry. Sorry about that, Schubert. Um, yeah, it's a great question. There are a few things they would need to know. I'd say the one aspect of it that they should be most aware of is that Many business owners feel that it is their right to reduce their taxes as much as possible while they're in business. And I can't disagree. I can't disagree with that. I mean, that's something that people do. They want to keep their tax burden down, and it's important. That said, when it comes time to selling, the books need to be in immaculate condition. So if you've got a year, if you're thinking of selling, but you think you're a year out, there are the two key things that are important are make sure that the books are in shape and are provable. You've got a decent accountant who's gone over them, and make sure that revenues stay up, as I mentioned earlier. No one wants a buyer will look at 3 years of, we'll ask for financial statements for the past 3 years when we list, and not income statement, not tax returns, sorry, but P&Ls. And no buyer will look favorably upon a business that has declining sales and declining EBITDA. You know the term EBITDA. We use SDE, seller's discretionary earnings, very
Right.
similar in concept.
Right.
Whatever the owner is taking out of the business. If those are declining, the the listing price will decline in concert with that. And that will be an unfortunate realization for the owner, like for the seller. Likewise, if the seller is claiming, I'm just picking a number, $1 million in revenue, and let's say $300,000 in EBITDA, SDE, and then we get into a sale with an interested buyer, and there's a period of due diligence that we go through where the buyer gets a chance to prove those earnings or not. It, they get a chance to see what's behind the curtain, if you will.
How long is that
And
period?
typically, it's 2 3 weeks,
Okay.
depending on the size of the business and the complexity of the business.
Gotcha.
So, as an example, if it's one location, a retail store, they've got QuickBooks on site, and they're keeping everything strong, due diligence could be ready in a week or two.
Okay.
If it's got multiple locations or different subsidiaries and it's a more complicated financial structure, that could take 3 maybe 4 weeks. Um, and typically there's a CPA involved. If the buyer doesn't have a CPA, we've got many of them that we could recommend for them to choose from. Whichever one of those they like. And if they cannot prove the earnings, the revenue and the earnings in due diligence, that's going to either cause the deal to fall apart, and will have wasted everybody's time from that perspective. It'll either cause the deal to fall apart or a decrease in the purchase price. The buyer will then say, "Look, I couldn't prove $1 million in revenue, and I couldn't prove $300,000 in SDE. So therefore, instead of offering you a $500,000 for the business or whatever, I'm only going to offer you 300,000."
Right.
And that's going to be a big hit to the seller. The seller is not going to be happy. And that's why I'm suggesting, please keep the revenues high. And however you've been handling the books up until now, make sure they're handled on the up and up when you hand the business over to a business broker and agent like myself. It's a critical aspect. Did I explain that well enough? Is it clear
Yes.
why it's important?
Yes. Yes. 100%.
Okay,
Now, when it comes to the taxes point, because whenever a business owner sell a business, it's a taxable event.
sure.
So,
Yep.
can you talk about that a little bit? Explain that process. What's the implications?
I can talk about it a little bit. I'm not supposed to give tax advice, but I can talk about the macro concepts, if
Right.
that's
Just
okay.
yes.
I don't really want to give tax advice. We have limits on what we're supposed to talk about, so I just want to be true to myself and to my profession. So essentially, if the business has been owned for more than a year, any sale would likely result in a capital gain, meaning property that's been owned for more than a year falls into long-term capital gain um, arena. So the typical long-term capital gain, depending upon your filing status and depending upon your income, okay, and I'm giving a little too much information, but everybody listening could look that up, is roughly 15%. That's long-term capital gains rates.
Right.
Okay. which can be, depending upon your tax bracket, much lower than your ordinary income rates, which, depending upon your income and other circumstances, could be in the 30 to 35% rate if your income is high enough, if your taxable income is high enough. So that's a relative good thing to have capital gains rates attached to the sale. There are ways to reduce even the capital gains, Schubert, but if you don't mind, that'd be something I'd much rather talk about one on one with a person who might be interested if they want to know more about that. I don't want to bring up specifics, but it's something I'm eminently qualified to discuss. It's just it gets very specific, and you can understand. I'd rather hold that off for a more
100%.
personal time. Thank you.
100%. Now, let's segue a little bit when it comes to who to sell to. Because
When
as
it
the
comes to what?
who to sell to,
Who to
a
sell to?
buyer,
Yes.
when a seller decides to sell, who to consider. So, what would you say is some of the consideration as far as the seller is concerned, who to choose to sell to?
That's a great question. You're getting you're answering asking all great questions, and I keep getting better, Schubert.
Thank you
So
for that.
it's a great question, and the answer that you find my giving might be a little bit surprising to you, but the business agent, your broker, has a lot to do when he's fielding inquiries about the business that's for sale, the subject business. There's a lot going on. We we pride ourselves on being very careful with the secrecy of the business. We don't. Nobody knows that the business is for sale. We don't mention the name of the business. We don't even mention the county that it's in. There's no phone number. There's no email. There's no website on the original listing. That part about it is critical so that employees and customers and vendors don't get upset that the company is in play. So we keep everything extraordinarily confidential. We all and so when an inquiry comes in, the very first thing we do is make certain that the interested buyer signs an NDA. You're familiar with those,
Hmm.
non-disclosure agreement,
Right?
and also a buyer profile. And I review the profile very, very carefully. Again, I want this to be a great fit. And so I'm looking for things like previous experience as well as financial wherewithal. So this is not a proof of funds. We do that afterwards. But up front, when we first look at the buyer, when the inquiry first comes in, and we'll get dozens of inquiries depending upon the business immediately. My job is to make sure that only qualified buyers can get through to the seller, largely because I don't want to waste the seller's time, but very closely aligned and almost right up there with it, just behind that reason, is that I also have a responsibility to the buyer. I'm a transactional agent, so I have to treat everybody fairly. And I don't want a buyer, just like I don't want the seller to have a buyer that can't afford the business or is ill qualified to run the business. So, not denigrating the profession, but I wouldn't set up a bricklayer. I'm really exaggerating here. A bricklayer to own an attorney's office is just not a fit in general. More, so we're also looking at the ability to pay, like to be able to buy the business, right? To me, just as important as that, and this is the part that most people aren't really looking for, I'm looking for a, a personality fit between the buyer and the seller. That's not to say that it's a fit with me. I don't really matter in this. I'm just the first point of defense. So I want there to be, I have to have a feeling, and it's just a thing that I've developed over a long career. You've got that too. I want there to be a fit between the buyer and the seller so that we're not going through a process where it's constantly like this.
Right.
So if a buyer is argumentative with me from the very, very beginning and I can't seem to explain how the process works. When I say argumentative, I don't mean that they're asking questions. That's all fair game, right? But if they're argumentative and I feel that they won't get the process down right and be a willing passenger on this train, I will not present them to the seller unless, of course, they come up with an offer. Then I'm obligated to present them to the seller. But I won't have them meet with the seller. If they come up with an offer, fine, I have to present it. But I will tell the seller, look, I really don't think there's a fit here. You do what you want. This is not my decision. It's yours, Mr. Seller. But I just don't think there's a fit here. This guy or gal is recalcitrant, is argumentative. If we think we're having problems now, just wait till this person has to spend some money and wait till we get to due diligence and we're buying a $5 million business and he's worried about $1,000. So you want to keep big picture in mind, and you can get that very quickly in a 15-minute conversation with the buyer, just by the nature of the questions that
So
they
that's
ask. And
so that point is critical, making sure that these two can see eye to eye and they can get along at least.
exactly right. I mean, there'll be a period of time where we have to go through the whole process through due diligence. The buyer is going to want to meet with the seller. They're going to meet first virtually, by Zoom or Teams, and then they're going to meet at the company's place of business after hours, so there's nobody else around. I may take them out to lunch just to have a nice, feel good conversation and get everybody on the same page. And if there's an immediate sign of recalcitrance or something like this, you can tell really early on that it's not going to work. And I've got to say, I don't know, maybe look, I don't like to pat myself in the back, Schubert, you know that, but maybe it's one superpower that I have, if I have one, it's to be able to put good people together.
That's good.
So, and of the deals that I've done, and the deals that I'm working on, maybe I'm just lucky that I've come up with good people on both sides, but everybody's really happy, which makes me really happy for what I do. Everybody's happy. And that's, after all, that's what you want on both sides.
Right. And I think it speaks to the level of flexibility when it comes to personality of the person. I heard
Couldn't agree
a
more.
great quote. I think it was an interview that Bruce Lee gave. Was 1970, right before his death, and he was talking about, you know, be like water. If you put water in a teacup, it take the shape
Yeah.
of the teacup. You put
Yeah.
water in a glass, take the shape of the glass. That doesn't mean that you have to change who you are. It just means that you have to be able to adapt in any situation. And in this particular situation, a business acquisition or selling a business,
Yes.
maybe you have bought a business in the past, but you don't know all the ins and outs of buying and selling a business. So being able to be agreeable with the buyer, with the seller, and also with the advisor that advising through that sale of the business, it's critical. And I
I
can understand why
absolutely
you say
agree.
it's so important.
And by the way, my feeling about that is not only relegated to buyers. I feel the same way about sellers. If I meet with someone and they just don't understand where this has to go, I won't take the listing. I don't want to be responsible for that person being unhappy, and typically that person is not happy in general.
Right.
As a quick example, without revealing names or industries or anything like that, I had somebody who called and wanted me to list. I went down to visit his place of business. If the books had been right, we would have listed for about $3 million. Okay. But he had no books and records, could not verify what the revenue and the net income was. He wanted me to just find the right guy who just understands. In other words, there was a lot of cash involved,
Right.
very little by way of deposits into a checking account, and there were no records to support it. And yet he wanted a premium for the business, which, as to my earlier point, if he'd been able to support that cash, look, you can take cash and still be able to support it. I'm not going to tell you how.
Right.
I mean, without depositing into a bank account, you can still support it. And as long as you can prove it, then a buyer won't have an issue with that and I can get a premium for it. But if somebody's just saying, the buyer needs to understand, that's a little bit too far a throw for me. It's a bridge too far. And so I wouldn't take that listing either. He was very argumentative during the process. I tried for 3 hours, honestly, to get him to understand how this should be done, how this had to happen, and it just wasn't going to happen. I gave it up. I said, "I'm sorry, I can't help you. You need somebody else."
I hear you. Now, when it comes to selling business, one thing that we keep hearing and that term keep get thrown around quite a bit is goodwill. Can you explain what goodwill is and why is it important?
Sure. Well, I mean, goodwill is simply the worth of the business that goes beyond the net assets. So if your assets minus liabilities, including fixed assets, a building, equipment, whatever, is $1 million, but you're bringing home EBITDA of 500,000 and the multiple, I know I'm talking about terms we haven't discussed yet, but let's
Right,
say we determine that the business is worth $3 million. The difference between the million and the 3 million, and this is a very simple example, is,
right.
is goodwill. The business is worth something more than its intrinsic assets. Does that make sense?
Intrinsic asset. Can you explain that? Break it down a little bit more.
Yeah, just the whatever assets are existing on the balance
The
sheet.
physical assets.
Yeah, the physical asset. So as I say, if if total assets are 2 million and total liabilities are 1 million, the net assets are 1 million. And you would think, without understanding goodwill, that the business is worth, in that sense, it's not really true, but like $1 million.
Right,
But if we're going to sell it for 3 million, if it's worth 3 million, and that's another conversation, another question you could ask me. If it's worth 3 million, the difference between the million in net assets and the listing price, the purchase price, is $2 million. That $2 million is the goodwill that you speak of.
gotcha.
Does that make sense?
It does.
It's worth what it's worth, not just because of the assets, but even more importantly, because of the customer base, the revenue base. If there is recurring revenue by way of service contracts, I'm giving you examples.
Right,
Not all businesses have service contracts, obviously, but all of these things conspire to make the business worth more than just its assets. So this spread in here is goodwill.
right.
Is that helpful? Does that make
It
sense?
does.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
So, do you find every business have that, or there's some business have goodwill, or some does? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, so successful businesses, most often, the vast preponderance of the time, have goodwill. If the business is not doing well or is failing and it's not showing earnings, then we have what is known as an asset sale. So let's just presume that there's $100,000 in inventory, but they haven't had any appreciable sales in the last 6 months. For whatever reason, the owner is sick, he's just not interested in it anymore. He's just not paying attention to the business, he or she. Then you have what is known as an asset sale. And basically, you're just selling off the inventory, whatever other assets, if there's equipment there. If they own a building, you can sell the building, of course. That has a value, obviously. So then it's an asset sale, and you don't get that premium for the goodwill. Does that make
It
sense? This
does.
is this part in here is missing.
Right,
Okay, but we can sell, we do asset sales all the time. Yeah, it's a small part, but it is a part, an integral part of the business that we do. We can help even if the business is not doing very well.
gotcha. Now, you talked about that a little bit, which is when you are selling the business, how much is that business is worth when it comes to valuation? Because sometimes Joe down the street may have a business that's worth $1 million, but in his mind, that's 5 million. So you, as a business broker, when you come along, what are some of the strategies, tactics that you use to determine the price of that particular business? And also, if you can touch on, is it the same thing for every industries? Meaning that if you're looking at a plumbing company compared to a dry cleaner or compared to a grocery stores.
Yeah, so it's one of the most important things we do to evaluate the business or value the business. And there are at least a half a dozen ways that I'm aware of to value. The most the process we use most often, again, I'll give you the high line of this, not all the details, and I'll follow it up with an example just for illustrative purposes. So there are many ways to do it. The way we use most often, these are main street businesses, by the way. I'm not talking about mergers and acquisitions for $100 million. Transworld thrives in an area somewhere between, I would say, $100,000 in listing price all the way through maybe 50 million. That's what I've seen most of. So largely they're main street businesses. Even the $50 million ones might be your corner grocery store or five corner grocery stores owned by the same person.
Right.
It could be a large tech company. It could be a large HVAC company. We consider those main street businesses. But there is a separate part of this business in mergers and acquisition that goes into the $100 million range, and it's a different type of sale for sure. So we're talking anywhere in that range up to 50 million, I would say. The way we do it, to answer your question, Schubert, is we look at the SDE, which again, in short, seller's discretionary earnings. That's where that's the essentially, in essence, the amount that the owner is taking from the business. It might not even be what's declared as salary. It could be other items as well. So if the owner puts his car through the business, I had an owner once who had a Maserati. He was putting it through the business. Clearly, he did not need a $250,000 car to have success in his business. He never even left the office, right? But he was
Nice
running it
toy.
through the business. What's that?
That was a nice toy.
Yeah, nice toy, right? Well, the business was very successful and he deserved a toy. I don't begrudge him any of that. But what we do is we then take that excess, which is clearly in excess, and we add it to the SDE. So let's say the SDE was $100,000. If there are other things that need to be added back that the buyer won't have, like generally a buyer won't have a Maserati, right? Generally, business owners who are selling aren't driving around in Maseratis. Generally,
Right.
so I would add that back. You need a car that's worth 50 grand in your business, or if it's a truck, maybe 100 grand, right? But in a business like this guy had, which we can't talk about, in a business that he had, he did not need a Maserati. So we add back the excess of what would be over what would be normal. So that adds to the business's SDE, and I'll tell you why that's important in a minute. And there are other things as well. So let's say they take an abundance of T&E, travel and entertainment, and a lot of that may or may not be on the business. It could approach 20, 30, $50,000 depending upon how lavish the seller spends. Could be a lot of money. So there are things that we can add back. Sometimes I've seen many times where sellers revamp their house, right? They spend $100,000 to fix up the house, to remodel it. Well, guess who pays for that?
The business.
So while it's not an expense of the business, we add, because it's not a normal expense of the business, we add that back. So let's say from the $100,000, and this is something we all do internally. And by the way, I really enjoy doing it as a CPA. It's a lot of fun for me. So we add back those things that are truly, in essence, not real business expenses. And we arrive at a new SDE. So it started at 100,000, it might end up at 200,000. And from that $200,000 revised base, by the way, I get the owner goes over all this with me, and I get him to sign off on that this is true. We take nothing for granted. We don't just trust the seller. We get the seller to sign off on everything because the buyer has to rely on this. So this is the seller saying what I just provided to the broker is true. So everybody's covered. The buyer can feel like he's got the real deal, and then he verifies it in due diligence, as I've stated. So then what happens, and here's where it's different by industry. Each industry, and also depending on the size of the business, generates a different multiple of SDE. So what I'm saying is a business that has SDE of $100,000, that's, let's just say, a restaurant, might have a multiple of 2, meaning that the businesses in that industry, and you can see these on all the multiple listing sites, If they've got an SDE of 100, they're listing for around $200,000. The multiple is
So
two.
multiple of twice or three times
Twice
the
SDE.
assets or sales.
SDE. Twice SDE.
And
That's why
SDE,
getting to the SDE number,
what's the
the
SDE
yeah,
stand for again?
seller's discretionary earnings.
Yeah, that's the EBITDA. That's a different name for
That's
the
the
EBITDA.
EBITDA number. Yes.
Gotcha.
Yep. Yeah. I just want the people listening to this interview to get used to using the proper verbiage for sales, and that verbiage is seller's discretionary earnings. Okay.
Makes sense.
And it does equivalate in a sense to EBITDA. So if you're comfortable using EBITDA, that's fine. So in another industry, say a high tech industry, if the SDE is a $500,000 and that industry uses a multiple of 5, that business would list for 2.5 million. And all of these, by the way, are available to the agents, to the brokers, where we know, I can tell by industry what the multiple is. It's not a secret to us. Every agent worth his salt would know that. I don't know it off the top of my head. I would just look it up,
Right.
then I pull multiples. Excuse me, I pull comps for those businesses that are similar to one being sold with similar amounts of SDE, and I review that on my first meeting with the seller so that he or she can see what the range is of multiples. Sometimes, let's say my source says it should be 3-time multiple. Some people will list at 2.5. Why? Why do you think they might list it underneath the preferred multiple? I'll ask you a question. Tell me.
Well, there might be different reasons that you don't know why they listed.
Right, but what would be a good reason though?
It could be the
Why would they
goodwill,
sell it cheap?
the goodwill that we spoke about. It could be
Well,
that.
no,
But
they might list it less because they may be in a hurry to sell. They may need to offload it quickly.
so they might be a
Or
motivated seller.
highly motivated and money means less to them. And then instead of selling at a 3-time multiple, they may have all the time in the world to wait, and they're motivated, but at the right price. Just like if you were to sell your house, you think it's worth a lot more maybe than it is. If your agent says it's worth $500,000 and you say 750, okay, well, I'll put it on the market at 750, but don't be surprised if it sits and sits and sits, because buyers are smart too. They don't want to overpay. The same thing for businesses.
So
So there's
so
the
you
dynamic
don't want to
involved.
overprice it.
You could overprice it if you want to, and maybe we'll get lucky. And by the way, nothing's etched in stone. If today we want to price it 20% over market, we can. It's not my decision, it's the seller's decision. I'm there to advise. I'm a consultant. If the seller says they want to price it 50% above market, I'm okay with it. I will explain that it likely won't get a lot of action, but we can always change it in a month, 2 or 3. Whenever the seller says, "Okay, now I'm getting serious,
Right.
Phil. Maybe you were right about this." They'll never actually say, "Phil, you were right." They'll go like your wife would do. Maybe you were right about this, right? so,
Right.
so, and then we bring the price down to a more market oriented level.
Right.
Okay.
Usually, even in real estate, you see that quite often. People would list the home, like you said, very high because they're like, yeah, I'm not ready to move yet. And after a while, they go back to the same agent and say, hey, you know what? Let's just lower
Yeah.
it by 10%, by 20%, because
Yeah.
they started feeling the fire, start feeling the pain.
It happens a lot. It happens a lot. Yeah.
Now,
Well, actually, the seller's feeling the pain. Actually, yeah, because
right.
it's not moving. Yeah.
Now, let's just say somebody's listening to this conversation and they are ready to sell. They say, okay, well, I've been thinking about that. I'm glad I stumbled on that podcast. What would you say some of the steps they need to start doing right now? So by the time they call you to say, hey, I'm ready to list my business. What are the steps they need to do right now to make sure that they're ready when they make that call?
It's part and parcel, Schubert, of what we talked about earlier, where they need to make sure the financial affairs are in order, meaning that the books are ready and accurate. The first thing that any agent worth his salt will ask for in the very first meeting are 3 years worth of financial statements. So you need to have those, or there's not a really good way to list it. Remember, if you're just going to come up with a guess as to what your earnings are, if you don't have books and records, you can get buyers that might be interested, but virtually every time it will fall apart if you can't prove it. You, and it'll just, wastes everyone's time, least of all mine, but the buyer and the sellers. You have to be able to prove what you're suggesting is the truth.
So the books has to be in good, in good conditions. Now, when it comes to the closing cost, who typically pays that?
Closing costs in a traditional sense, like in real estate, when you sell your home, are relatively small here. There are typically some small attorney's fees. It depends on the size of the deal and the complexity of the deal. In a standard Main Street business, anywhere between $3,000 to $10,000, depending upon the complexity, right? And you can use your own attorney, or we've got a slew of what's known as transactional attorneys. You don't want like a family attorney who handles divorces handling a business sale. It's just not a good fit. It'd almost be like having an anesthesiologist or a skin doctor try to help you if you had a heart attack. They know a lot about what they know, but they know very little about cardiology.
Makes
So
sense.
you really want a transactional attorney. If anybody's interested, that's who you look for. A transaction. They know exactly what to look for. They don't spend a lot of time chasing ghosts that don't exist. They know what to look for. They've done it many, many times. If you don't have your own, I'll be happy to suggest a few.
Now, let's say somebody's listening to that conversation. They want to sell a business, but they do not want to use a business broker for whatever reason. How is that process like? It's just if somebody wants to sell a business on their own. Can you explain a little bit that process and also some of the things that they should be cautious about?
Well, look, I've got a prejudiced view towards it, and I really believe that we provide a valuable service. So I would say, in two words, good luck. I mean, could it be done? Can it be done? Yes. Can it be done successfully? Yes. But is that what you really want to be doing? Spending all that time when you're already running a business and you've got your life to consider? Do you know the ins and outs? Do you know the idiosyncrasies? You're great at what you do, but you need a professional, someone who knows the ropes to do this. What should you do? Um, I guess you could list it on a listing site, field all the calls yourself. I mean, understand, like, depending on the business, I've had a couple of three over the last few months. I've gotten hundreds of phone calls, hundreds. How is a business owner going to field that? Take the time with each of those buyers to do it right, to make sure that there's a fit, to make certain that the buyer is qualified from a financial perspective. How on I can't even see how it would be possible to make the right decision unless you got lucky. So so I'll quote an old Clint Eastwood movie from one of his westerns, and it was "Feeling Lucky, Punk." Yeah, I don't know if you remember that movie. It's an old Clint Eastwood
I,
movie.
I watch a
You're
lot
probably
of
too
Clint
you're
Eastwood
too young
growing
for
up.
that.
I mean, I watch a lot of his Western, but I don't remember this particular quote, but sounds like something Clint Eastwood would say.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just like him. It was perfect. It's a classic line. Feeling lucky, punk.
Yes, 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 yes.
So anyway,
So,
not that any of the sellers are punks. Please don't misunderstand me. But it's a long road to hoe. It's a difficult road. Can you do it? Yes. The price that we generate is designed to include the seller's is designed to include the agent's commission, just like in a home sale. So, you know, a wise person once said to me, in business, while you're in business, you don't skimp on a great accountant and you don't skimp on a great attorney. They will save your life, your financial life.
right.
And I have found over a 40-year career that that is absolutely true. And as it relates to business brokerage or even to home sales, you want somebody good to hold your hand through this. You want somebody to help you make these right decisions. So,
It's like the old saying.
obviously, I have a jaundiced view towards it. Obviously, I mean, I do what I do.
Right.
I would advise strongly against it. But look, have at it. If you think you can do it, go for it before you call me. Try it for a few months, see what happens. And if it doesn't work, I'd be more than happy without prejudice to
And
help you through the process.
to piggyback on what you just said, it's like stepping on dollars to go after pennies. By not
Yeah,
using a business broker, thinking you're gonna save money and doing it yourself. So
exactly.
that makes sense.
Exactly.
Now,
And I understand the. Sorry, go ahead, please.
what about selling business to employees? Let's just say, for example, if somebody have uh, an HVAC business and they have good employees or family members, how's that process like?
I'm actually doing one now. Um, it in large terms, by and large, presuming there's a personality fit, it's a fabulous idea. Now, I'm not about not necessarily family, but employees. You already know from the beginning of our conversation that I had a falling out with my father for something that I was not prepared to do. He
Right,
knew that. He was wise, and I can see that now. Like there's a great expression: the older I get, the smarter my father was.
right.
Right, and I can see that now that I'm a father. But um, I think that you really want to make certain that the folks you're considering selling to are of and these things would be obvious are of high moral character, obviously, that they have the financial wherewithal to complete the transaction, and that you can get along with them. You'll be with them for X period of time, helping them because they may know their end of the business. Let's say if you're running a dental practice and you may have a somebody who's just recently gotten their license and they know how to fix teeth, but they don't know anything at all about the business side, right? So you're going to have to work with them and show them how to run the business. And that would be true of any business, obviously, not just a dental practice. So your employees may be qualified at roofing, at HVAC, at plumbing, at electrical, at high tech. They may be very qualified in what they do, but maybe they're not a sharp businessman. And you'd have to be concerned because in very many cases, you'll be providing them with some debt equity. So you'll want to be relatively confident that the business will stay profitable, active, and that they will be able to pay you those funds. Uh, if you want me to dig in further, it may be important to talk about that.
Yeah, please
It's
do.
not it's not absolutely essential for you to provide debt equity. You don't have to provide any financing. It's not always the case, but it is the case many times. I'd say 90% of the cases, there's some owner debt involved where the owner holds a note. One of the biggest reasons is, in addition to the fact that the buyers typically do need financing, especially when the businesses get larger, but it's a great show of faith on the seller's part that they believe the business will continue. And that's more, of course, where it's not an employee and not a family member because they're outside the business. If you're selling a business for $1 million and you're willing to hold I'm picking a number,
Right,
you're willing to hold $100,000 note over 5 years, let's say. It's a nice feeling for the buyer to have to know that you trust that you believe that the business will stay active and profitable.
right.
So it's become it is an important tool, and I urge wherever it's possible for a seller to do that.
Gotcha. Now,
Okay.
what about if the seller, it's himself or herself, have debts with the business? Does that complicate the selling process? Let's just say, for example, they owe the bank $1 million or $5 million.
You mean if it's an employee, you mean?
No, let's just say the owner of the business have debts. They have some debts
Oh,
with a small SBA
I
loan.
see. I'm sorry. Yes.
Does that
Yeah.
complicate the process?
It should not complicate it. Just know that in the vast preponderance of cases, all the debt must be paid off by the buyer, by the seller prior to closing. So the seller has got to use either his own funds available or the proceeds from the sale to close out any debt. That's accounts payable, leases, anything else. Those have all got to be paid off at the close, by closing.
Right.
Is that helpful?
It does. It does. Now, what
Okay.
about if the seller want to finance the deal, meaning that instead of using an SBA loan, and they just say they have that good employee and they want to help that employee, but the employee doesn't have the funding. How does that
Yeah.
process like? Explain that process a little bit.
So just so you know, whether it's even if it was with SBA, and SBA is a whole nother animal, by the way. SBA is a fantastic source of both funds and aggravation, mostly to the agent, because we have to deal with them all the time.
Right.
But that's another subject for another conversation. If you have the stomach for another one of these, it's a long story. But the SBA, and I know this is not your question, but just taking a little tangent, the SBA loves it when an employee, a key employee of the business, is going to buy it. They love it because they know that they're qualified. They understand the business. So currently, and the SBA rules change all the time. So please keep that in mind. Currently, if you've been involved in the business, the SBA will lend up to 95% of the list of the purchase price. It's huge,
Right.
which means that the buyer only has to come up with 5%.
Right.
So in $1 million deal, right, the SBA is going to come up with $950,000. Not in every case, of
That's
course. I mean, the
pretty
buyer has to be
significant.
buyer has to be credit worthy. What was that?
That's significant.
Very significant. Now, and as I say, I hope you heard me. It's not in every case. The buyer has to be credit worthy, and the SBA has to approve the buyer, of
Right.
course. Now, in the case of an employee who's a relative, the same thing applies. And typically, although like with me and my dad, typically there's a very harmonious relationship between the two parties if they're related. But and the SBA likes that as well, but oftentimes not.
So, what about if a business is a franchise? You know, what's the difference between somebody selling a regular business they own outright and selling a franchise? Can you explain that process?
Sure. So the major difference, Schubert, I mean, a business is a business, right? The major difference is that depending upon the franchisor, and I'll call them ZOR from now on as an abbreviation, depending on the franchisor, and every one of them is different. They require different things of the buyer. So this financial the franchisor has to approve the buyer. They'll chat with the buyer. There's an application involved. There's financials involved. They're going to do just a bunch of due diligence on their own. And then also, of course, if they get approved, there's training involved, depending on the franchise, a week to 4 weeks. I've seen it as long as 4 weeks. So it's not a, it's not a, it's less of a smooth process when there's a franchisor involved because it's a third party. The buyer and seller can agree, but the franchisor will always insert themselves as a sort of additional party. They want to make sure that the buyer is the right fit for that franchise business. So when he becomes a franchisee,
Right.
he's the right personality, the right fit. He in every different way. So that's the major difference with the franchise when there's a franchise involved.
Gotcha.
Just it adds a layer of um, of business operations that we have to consider. That's
Gotcha.
all. A lot of communications with the franchisor, with the attorneys, and that kind of thing.
Now, all these things sounds it's not an easy process. You know, it's
Correct.
you have to have a professional in your corner. Now, as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, what would you say some of the biggest challenge you have faced throughout your career and that have you have overcome and help you become who you are today and helping all those business owners and solving that problem of selling and buying businesses?
Overall, and I haven't owned a business now in about 15 years of my own, except for this one. Overall, and especially now in today's age where there's a shortage of labor, I would say in general terms, HR, employees, things are infinitely more complicated now than they were 15 years ago. Um, so I would say employee issues, concerns, making sure the right person is in the job. I've had times where, and I did most of the hiring, so I can't blame anybody but myself, where I chose people who were ill fit emotionally to handle the job. And if you'll read between the lines, what I'm suggesting is they had dependency issues,
Right.
which I could not know. And I did not see when I did the interview. And that caused significant issues in the workplace. Those, to me, those were the biggest issues. Other people have issues with sales. How do I run a sales force? I'm a great administrator. I'm a great printer. I'm a great HVAC guy. But how do I get sales? That wasn't it for me. Employees, as much as I love people, they were a difficult thing. The more employees I had, the more difficult it was. And
Makes
even though I had layers of management, to handle some of those things, sometimes I had issues with the management people in place. So, I mean, overall, it all worked out. But if you're asking, and the businesses did fine. But if you're asking what was the most difficult part, I would say employees.
Now, when it comes to challenges, a lot of time strength can arise from solving a challenge.
Mm.
What would you say from the years of experiences that you had, some of the challenges that you turn into strength and now serve you well?
I think there are two overall, and I wouldn't be the first person to say this. I'm certain there must be quotes, 1,000 quotes on both of these things. Honestly, one, the most important I think is persistence, staying at it, being strong, fight through adversity, and then at the same time, they may seem like they're opposites. Is patience. You've got to learn to be patient, to follow the process, to allow things to play out, even if it doesn't look like they're playing out properly now. And that all that relates to is learning from your mistakes. There's a great quote that says, "I never fail, I learn." Right? I
Right.
wish I knew the author, but it's one that I use a lot.
There's a lot of them.
And yeah, it's a great quote. And but it's a difficult thing to do that when you're young because you haven't had the benefit of the experience. It's like what comes first, the chicken or the egg? You have to have the experience to know these things, and you can't get experience until you've been there, right?
Right.
So it's tough. But the good news is if you're smart about it and if you're patient, to my point, you learn. If you just don't give up and just keep going, keep on failing. Michael Jordan had this great quote that some like I think his shooting percentage over his career was almost 40%, which is terrific,
Right.
right? Just terrific. So he missed 60% of his shots. So he just kept shooting. He just kept working. He just kept trying. I mean, the ultimate competitor, right?
Right.
And I think you'd find that from to use an athletic metaphor, all the great athletes over time would say probably the same thing. The Kobe Bryants, the Larry Birds of the world. I keep using basketball. I'm a big fan,
Right.
but they keep on. They keep on keeping on, so to speak. And it's not just what I've learned. I just think that that's a big part of success. Every time you try something, whether it's new or you're just continuing in what you're doing, you are learning,
Right.
which makes you more qualified to handle the next task. So don't give up. Don't ever give up. Keep on moving. That's not to say you shouldn't change positions or you should stay in your job if you hate it, but move on to something else. Maybe you're ready for something else. Maybe you're ready to buy a business.
Right.
Well, I hate that really was an accident how that came about. But maybe you're ready not to work for the man anymore. Maybe you need to be your own guy.
Right.
I have found that, by the way, with entrepreneurs. Looking back at my dad and myself, basically, my father, could never work for somebody else. He was a loner. He was his own man, right? Like there's a Frank Sinatra song, "My Way." He did it
Right.
his way, and maybe people maybe people who are entrepreneurs, maybe they have a bit of ADD and they can't stay focused on a task that the boss gives them. I mean, look, a lot of people make it in corporate America, right? And they do very, very well with it.
Right.
But if you've got an entrepreneurial spirit where you're like you got ants in your pants, so to speak, and you want to just do things your way and not get tied up in the in the incredible morass of the corporate structure, maybe that's the hallmark of an entrepreneur. If you're suffering from that, maybe that's why. Maybe that environment isn't quite for you, and you find yourself in your own business,
Right.
perhaps.
Well said. Now, looking back, is there anything you would do differently? Anything that you've learned, you say, hey, you know what, I wish I knew that. And if I had the chance, I probably would approach it differently.
So this also comes from a movie. I can't remember which one. Somebody
Really?
asks somebody asks an old guy, and he says, "What would you have done differently?" And the old guy says, "Well, I would have taken better care of my teeth." I'm just joking. I'm just kidding. But um, look, I think I've made mistakes. Of course, everybody does. It doesn't make you a bad person if you learn from them. As I've said, you come out on top and you smell like a rose. Um, I don't know that I would have done anything differently. I mean, I could say to you, I would have not gone to college and worked for my father, and we would have had a great thing together. Maybe we would have been the kings of printing, even though printing right now is a dead industry, the way I know it.
Right.
Offset lithography is really kind of dead. Um, but then I would not have gone to college. Would that have served me well? I would not have no. I would not have been able to. I can tear apart books better than most people you know, right? And I would not have had that skill, the critical thinking process that's important, that works when you go to college, that they teach you.
Right.
It's not that college is critical for somebody to be a success, but it's been part of my life for sure. And would I not have gotten married so young? I can say this because my wife is not in the room, but I got married when I was 20. I married my high school sweetheart. Would things have been better had I waited 5 years? I don't see it. I just don't see it. I have a fantastic wife and a fantastic life. So the major things, I think, no, I don't think I would have changed anything. This is I'm living my best life. I think because even though there's been bumps, um, because of the decisions I've made, and I think most people probably feel that way, right?
Right.
I'm not alone in that,
Right. Well said.
right?
Well
Yeah.
said. Well, it's been an awesome conversation. Phil, if
This has
somebody
been fun.
listening to this conversation here and they want to get in touch with you, they want to get a hold of you, how can they do that?
Oh, well, okay, that's very nice of you. Thank you. So Philip Proctor with two L's. I go by Phil, Phill, Proctor, Proctor. You can find me on LinkedIn under Phil Proctor. My my office cell is 954-234-0036. That's 954-234-0036. My email is pproctor at tworld, that's TWORLD.com. Oh, and I have an email. Excuse me, I have a website. I don't know what it is, but I have a website. Hold on. It's tworld.com/agent/Philip, Phillip, Proctor, /. Once again, tworld.com/agent/Philip Proctor /. Hope that helps.
Well, Phil, thank you so much for doing that, man. What an awesome conversation.
This
It's,
was really fun for me, Schubert. Thanks for having me on board, and thanks for the interesting questions. I hadn't thought about a lot of this until you asked them.
yeah,
So I really appreciate this. Thank you for having me on. I
one-
hope I hope I can help some people.
yeah, 100%. There you have it. What a conversation. Phil, thank you so much for being here. I feel like we barely scratched the surface, but I've learned a ton. And I'm sure our listeners probably feel the same way. Folks, if you are listening to this conversation and you want to get a hold of Phil, please get a hold of him. His information is going to be in the show notes. And if you like this content, please like and share it with somebody that can benefit from it. And while you're here, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, because every week we're going to keep coming back with more strategies, more ideas to keep you growing, to help you protect your business and thrive. Until next time, see you in the next episode. Bye, everybody.